Hey there, Malika Lee with another From the Heart. This one is more almost like a vlog entry, but still from the heart, of course. So I've been watching Real Housewives. So I better stop doing that. It's shaking my setup. So I've been watching Real Housewives of New York, and this is the first season. I think they're in season 13 that they've ever had really a non-white identifying. I take that back. Maybe Luann identifies as partial Native American, but I don't think from looking at her that you can necessarily tell. Not to take away her ethnicity at all. If that's part of her ancestry, it's part of her ancestry. But this is the very first season out of 13 years that they have a African American woman on there, Ebony K. Williams, and recently they had an episode where Luann actually is the one they were speaking passionately, had a disagreement, and Luann turns to Ebony and is like, "You're an angry woman." And Ebony calls her on. It's like, "Oh, really? Now I'm the angry Black woman." And so it brought up my own angry Black woman story that I wanted to share with you guys, and some things that I've learned since then, because I was confused by the situation that I was in personally because I wasn't angry. So basically what happened, I'll keep this part short and then get into some things that I've learned from there. So basically, I've done extensive like training, and a lot of these trainings, especially these last several years, there's not that many African American people in them. And we were at this retreat offsite, and we had this experience where we had literally no water in our hotel room. And these were nice, this was a nice establishment, but we had no water in our hotel room. I through the night, from evening, late afternoon, until maybe around lunchtime the next day. And I'm remembering that because I had a roommate, and my roommate had gone to the pool during our break. And then when she went to take a shower before we went into session again, there was no water for her to take a shower. Then got up early in the morning because they said it would be back on by 8. Still no water. Can you imagine, like, after swimming in the pool, not being able to like shower? Anyway, God bless her. That's my girl. So I went down to the lobby, now our water's back up and everything, but I went down to the lobby like, okay, how are we going to correct this? How are you all going to make this experience right? Because this came, of course, at a great inconvenience. We're brushing our teeth with bottled water and all this other stuff. So the lady who assists me, and I see another woman from class behind me, and we talk while we're waiting to be helped. And she has basically the exact same experience that I have, as far as the no water and for that duration. So that aside, I just want to say that for 9 years, I worked with the public and trained extensively around de-escalation, nonviolent de-escalation. So I just want to put that as an aside. So I've been trained extensively on how to de-escalate situations, and also how to be aware of my own emotional temperature, as so that I don't escalate things, right? So I'm saying that to let you know that I've had a lot of training, and I've had a great deal of self-awareness around this. So I'm not even mad when I'm in line and talking to this lady. So anyway, when I go up and of course detail what my experience was, and I was just like, okay, so what are you all going to do for the inconvenience? And the lady said, we can take $35 off your bill. And my spidey sense said, $35 for us not having, and like I said, these were nice accommodations. So I was like, So I didn't accept that. And so I asked if there was a supervisor or manager, someone else that I could speak to, that if that's all that she could do, surely there was someone else that could do more, right? Or have more authority to rectify this situation. So then this man comes from the back and he backs her up saying, well, we can do $35 off, but we can follow up with you and call the room, and like they have to do all this other stuff, right? So I was like, okay, let's do that. Cause I definitely, like, my spidey sense was like, $35, they are trying to like screw you again. The first screw was about not having water, although that was, of course, beyond their control. So anyway, my sensibility, like I told you, there was another person behind me in line, an older white woman, older, she's older than me. She's not older, period. Probably in her 50s, late 40s. also had the same experience. So my sense was, let me hang back. I'm going to wait and see what they tell her, and how they're going to address it with her. So I sit and I wait. She gets helped by another representative or whatever at the desk. And then I approach her as she walks away and I said, so what did they do for you? She said, oh, they gave me, they basically credited her one night worth of her stay for that night of inconvenience. And I was like, what? We're talking, this is over $100. So they're crediting her over $100 to her room for that one night inconvenience. They tried to give me only $35. So I was like, I knew that was some bullshit. I'm just going to be real, say what's say what's on my heart. So I was like, okay, well, when somebody calls my room for us to address it, I'm going to, say it plain, because all of there was a student rate. So she's paying the same amount for her room that we're paying for ours, I'm pretty sure. So then we get back to class that evening, and right before like our lunch break or major break, sometimes they'll call students that they want to see in the back of the room during the break, like right at the beginning of the break, I'd like to see XYZ. So at the beginning of the break, right before it starts, I hear the student list, of which one of the people whose name was called was mine. So I go back to the person who said they wanted to see me. We sit down. She's like, I understand that you were angry. I was like, angry when? when was this? Where was I? And she was like, somebody saw you in the lobby and said you were angry. And I was like, no, I wasn't angry. And I laid out to her what happened, including that they gave another student for the same exact experience. They credited her one night's cost, right? One night's expense of the room. So she was like, she got it. She's like, oh, okay. So and so she offers some coaching to call and tell them, hey, I want what this person has, do you have their name and all this other stuff? So I was like, yeah, I'm on it. So that's my angry Black woman story. And the funny thing is that I wasn't even angry. And that's what happens to a lot of us. But I was so puzzled because I was like, my voice, my tone was never inappropriate. And I even validated this with the woman who was in line behind me. I talked to her later and I was like, do you know what happened? And she was like, girl, no, I listened to the whole thing and you were calm. And so anyway, not to say that anything is wrong with being angry. That's a whole other part. I'm going to get to that in a second. So I was puzzled by that because I was like, there was nothing in my tone, nothing in my demeanor. Like I wasn't even angry. So I was like, I don't understand how they got that. Fast forward to a book that a friend of mine told me about that I started reading called Rage Becomes Her. It's going to be backwards. The Power of Women's Anger. I'm going to butcher her name maybe, by Soraya Kamali. This book right here. So I'm reading this. And one of the things that she says, which was like light bulb moment. So from a patriarchal standpoint, the image of femininity, or like our female code, right? What's appropriate or acceptable behavior, right? What's socially acceptable. First of all, the imagery of that, right, is the white woman. And then compounding with that, the behavior is usually like being docile, right? AKA submissive. I wrote down a little list. Compliant, fragile, right? You need to be protected. So all of these things. And she talks about how non-white women, first of all, are not given that same experience in the sense of like the back in the day before women, before white women, right, were working and usually were cared for by their husbands and their providers. Black women, my ancestors, were right up working in the fields alongside their husband. There was no sense of like with her femininity that she was not as strong and capable to do work, right? In hard labor, hard ass labor. And so she said, that's one thing. The other thing is that when women step outside of that social norm, right, of what is acceptable for women, then even if it's not anger, even if it's just being assertive, even if it's just like standing up for yourself, right? You're not being docile, so you're angry. So she was like, angry is a code for all of these other behaviors that are non-conforming to what being feminine, right? Being what a woman is. And I was like, oh, that's what that person projected onto me. Just because I didn't accept what they said and asked to see someone, they just immediately coded that with anger. And so the interesting thing about it is she said she does this cross section with ethnicity. And she said that the only group of women, I believe this is just in America, the only group at high school graduation, they rate males and females, right? They do this quiz or whatever, and then they look at confidence based on the results. And she said the only ethnicity where the girls end up more confident than the boys of all the different, cross sections of race in this country were Black women, African American women. And she goes into why some of that is, like our matriarchal culture, that we are really encouraged and indoctrinated with advocating for ourselves and knowing that this world, especially with patriarchy, with racism, that it is that we have to assert ourselves and stand up for ourselves, because basically, like, they're not checking for us. It's not going to fall in our favor more often than not. And so there is a correlation between assertiveness, right? And power. Speaking up for yourself is something that's powerful. And I think it's interesting that if there's a documentary called She's So Beautiful When She's Angry that talks about the women's lib movement. And even this, MAD, Moms Against Drunk Driving, she talks about how anger can really be a motivating factor, right? An empowering factor, a catalyst for change. An example of that is Gandhi. Like, he was so angry with the way that he was treated when he was on a train in South Africa. And that anger is really what fueled him into all the work that he did in South Africa around nonviolence and social change. And that then became parlayed and he took back with him to India, the colonized India, and worked towards their liberation. So anger has a activating force, right? There's an awareness or a connection between that and power. Unless you become like, that's a whole, I'm not going to get into that, go down that path of how it can, go another way. I'll do that maybe in another video. But anger in and of itself is neutral. So we never say or discount a man for expressing himself when he's angry. In fact, we saw that a lot in the media. We've seen a lot of angry white men, including men who are shooting up places. Now, that's not all white men, but statistically speaking, those that have been involved in mass shootings statistically are higher, right? White men are the perpetrators than any other group. And so we don't say, oh, there's this other angry white man doing this. And so the question then becomes, if it's not about anger itself, right? Because we're not pointing out when everybody's expressing anger, only when, like this archetypal angry Black woman. So then what is really at the crux of it? What is it really about if we're not discounting other people for expressing themselves when they're angry? It's about trying to disempower people. It's trying to because as soon as somebody expresses themselves and you're like, oh, they're angry, then it's dismissive, right? You invalidate everything that they're saying because it's under the guise of being angry. And I'll say that the internalized aspect of it is that, if you know me personally, I have shied away and really could probably stand to be more in balance with expressing my anger. But I have not in the past because I don't want to be categorized as an angry Black woman, which is what made that experience even more confusing, because I was like, I wasn't even angry. And so I say all that to say that what's wrong with being angry? Like, anytime I can experience in the past, if I look back to when I was angry, it's when a boundary has been crossed. Like, I'm not saying to blow shit up or, anything and act on that anger. But if we neutralize, I think it's in and of itself, it can be a neutral emotion, like all emotions are, and it's giving us valuable feedback. And so all I would say, like even with Cheryl Underwood, when Ozzy Osbourne, Sharon Osbourne's wife, was like going on this emotional roller coaster, before she left the show. And Cheryl Underwood was like, didn't want to, kept her cool, right? And didn't want to be like typecast as this angry Black woman. And I really feel like, and this is what she says in this book, The Power of Women's Anger, is that if we allow ourselves to pay attention to our anger and not repress it, suppress it, and use it as information, it can really be a catalyst to motivate us and to empower us to bring about social change. After all, we are 50% at least of the population, and our rights don't reflect the amount of people that we have to be represented in places of legislature, in religion, religious leadership, and the list goes on. So my point in all that is just like to encourage people maybe to change the narrative, to maybe look at things a little bit differently. And if you're a woman listening, to validate your feelings and experience, whether it's anger or another emotion. We don't always have to act on it. I'm not saying you have to act on it or lash out, but not to discount it, not to discount it. And so those are just some reflections that I wanted to offer. Like I said, again, rage becomes her. You know, there is a correlation between, I think, asserting oneself and confidence, like she said, statistically, speaking with the teenage boys and girls. And so I'll just leave you with that. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Please leave comments below if you've ever been had an experience of someone thinking you're angry and you weren't, and or like helpful ways that you have used to channel your anger productively, right? Because anger is like fire, it can burn you too. So I'll put another video about that, but I'd love to hear your comments on this below. And last thing, the double standard on Real Housewives in New York. Right before that part where Ebony, the African-American woman on the show, was called angry, this other white woman on the show like called them all hoes, like stormed off. And I'm being literal here. Like, I'm not even paraphrasing or exaggerating. She literally like read them, pretty much almost cussed them out if she didn't cuss. And no one called her angry. So that's the other part. And so if you're a Black woman listening to this, I think the other challenge is to have the courage, and I'm telling myself this first, is to have the courage to honor yourself. And sometimes I have not honored myself. And there haven't even been people I'll ever see again, but I haven't honored myself. If somebody cut me in line or different things, that I've held back from speaking up for myself and honoring myself because I was so concerned with what other people would think. And so I just want to encourage all of us, if you're watching this video, male, female, whatever, to honor yourself. And sometimes speaking up and asserting yourself is the best way to do it, given a situation or circumstance. All right. Like I said, please comment below. Many blessings. Until the next time. Bye.